Oscar Wilde once said the artist is the creator of beautiful things. He himself was an artist, one who defied categorization and a man who cried out against strict definition. His works span genre and style, which you will see through the various scenes, monologues, short stories, essays, poems, and novel excerpts brought to life by this talented cast. His words sparkle with a touch of heart and a bit of snark, which you will hear through the interpretations of his wit and wisdom as read by some ERHS theater alumni. Though he was most well known as a playwright, it's safe to say that Wilde's versatility as an artist is what allowed him to leave his creative mark on the literary world and the greater world at large. Since 2013, members of the Emerald Ridge Theatre program have proudly worn one of Wilde's most noteworthy quotes on the back of our theater shirts. "I regard theater as the greatest of all art forms, the most immediate way in which a human being can share with another the sense of what it is to be a human being. Perhaps no one has better defined what makes theater so unique." With this production, we are excited to honor Oscar Wilde's literary legacy and to thank him for lending us his beautiful words.
Actors are so fortunate. They can choose whether they appear in tragedy or comedy, whether they will suffer or make merry, laugh or shed tears. But in real life, it is different. Most are forced to perform parts for which they have no qualification. The world is a stage, but the play is badly cast.
What is the difference between literature and journalism? Journalism is unreadable and literature is unread.
Unless one is wealthy, there is no use in being a charming fellow. Romance is the privilege of the rich, not the profession of the unemployed. The poor should be practical and prosaic. It is better to have a permanent income than to be fascinating. These are the great truths of modern life, which Huey Erskine never realized.
Poor Huey. Intellectually, we must admit, he was not of much importance. He never said a brilliant or even an ill-natured thing in his life. But then he was wonderfully good-looking, with his crisp brown hair, his clear-cut profile, and his gray eyes. He was as popular with men as he was with women, and he had every accomplishment except that of making money.
His father had bequeathed him his cavalry sword and a history of the Peninsular War in 15 volumes. Huey hung the first over his looking-glass, put the second on a shelf between Ruff's Guide and Bailey's Magazine, and lived on $200 a year that an old aunt allowed him.
He had tried everything. He had gone on the stock exchange for 6 months, but what was a butterfly to do among bulls and bears? He had been a tea merchant for a little longer, but had soon tired of Pico and Souchong. Then he had tried selling dry sherry. That did not answer. The sherry was a little too dry. Ultimately, he became nothing. A delightful, ineffectual young man with a perfect profile and no profession.
To make matters worse, he was in love. The girl he loved was Laura Merton, the daughter of a retired colonel who had lost his temper and his digestion in India, and had never found either of them again. Laura adored him, and he was ready to kiss her shoestrings. They were the handsomest couple in London, and had not a penny piece between them. The colonel was very fond of Huey, but would not hear of any engagement.
"Come to me, my boy," the colonel used to say, "when you have got £10,000 of your own, and then we will see about engagement. Huey looked very glum on those days, and had to go to Laura for consolation.
One morning, as he was on his way to Holland Park, where the Mertons lived, he dropped in to see a great friend of his, Alan Trevor. Trevor was a painter. Indeed, few people escape that nowadays, but he was also an artist, and artists are rather rare.
Personally, he was a strange, rough fellow, with a freckled face and a red, ragged beard. However, when he took up the brush, he was a real master, and his pictures were eagerly sought after.
He had been very much attracted by Hugh at first, it must be acknowledged, entirely on account of his personal charm. The only people a painter should know, Alan Trevor used to say, are people who are unsuccessful and beautiful, people who are an artistic pleasure to look at and an intellectual repose to talk to. Men who are dandies and women who are darlings should rule the world. At least they should do so.
However, after he got to know Huey better, he liked him quite as much for his bright, buoyant spirits and his generous, reckless nature, and had given him the permanent entrance to his studio.
When Huey came in, he found Alan Trevor putting the finishing touches to a wonderful life-size picture of a beggar man. The beggar himself was standing on a raised platform in a corner of the studio. He was a wizened old man, with a face like wrinkled parchment and a most piteous expression.
Over his shoulders was flung a coarse brown cloak, all tears and tatters. His thick boots were patched and cobbled, and with one hand he leaned on a rough stick, while with the other he held out his battered hat for alms.
Alan, what an amazing model.
An amazing model? I should think so, my dear Huey. Such beggars as he are not to be met with every day. Attavaille, mein cher, a living Velasquez, my stars. What an etching Rembrandt would have made of him.
Poor old chap, how miserable he looks. But I suppose to you painters, his face is his fortune.
Certainly. You don't want a beggar to look happy, do you?
How much does a model get for sitting?
A shilling an hour.
And how much do you get for your picture, Alan?
Oh, for this I get 2,000.
Pounds?
Guineas. Painters, poets, and physicians always get guineas.
Well, I think the models should have a percentage. They work quite as hard as you do.
Nonsense! Nonsense! Why, look at the trouble of laying on the paint alone, and standing all day at one's easel. It's all very well, Huey, for you to talk, but I assure you that there are moments when art almost attains to the dignity of manual labor. But you mustn't chatter. I'm very busy. Sit down and keep quiet.
After some time, the butler came in and told Mr. Trevor that the frame-maker wanted to speak to him.
Don't run away, Huey. I will be back in a moment.
The old beggar man took advantage of the painter's absence to rest for a moment on a wooden bench that was behind him. He looked so forlorn and wretched that Huey could not help pitying him, and felt in his pockets to see what money he had.
All he could find was a sovereign and some coppers. Poor old fellow, Huey thought to himself. He wants it more than I do, but it means no hansoms for a fortnight. He walked across the studio and slipped the sovereign into the beggar's hand. The old man started, and a faint smile flitted across his withered lips. "Thank you, sir," he said. "Thank you."
Then Alan Trevor returned, and Huey took his leave, blushing a little at what he had done. He spent the rest of the day with Laura, got a charming scolding for his extravagance, and had to walk home.
That night, he strolled into the Palette Club, about 11 o'clock, and found Alan Trevor sitting by himself, drinking seltzer.
Well, Alan, did you get the picture finished all right?
Finished and framed, my boy. And, by the by, you have made a conquest. That old Molly you saw is quite devoted to you. I had to tell him all about you, who you are, where you live, what your income is, what prospects you have.
My dear Alan, I shall probably find him waiting for me when I go home. But of course you were only joking. Poor old fella. Wish I could do something for him. I think it is dreadful that anyone should be so miserable. I've got heaps of old clothes at home. Do you think he would care for any of them? Why, his rags were falling to bits.
But he looks splendid in them. I wouldn't paint him in a frock coat for anything. What do you call rags? I call romance. What seems poverty to you is picturesqueness to me. However, I'll tell him of your offer.
Alan, you painters are a heartless lot.
An artist's heart is in his head. And besides, our business is to realize the world as we see it, not to reform it as we know it. A chacun son métier. And now tell me how Laura is. The old model was quite interested in her.
You don't mean to say you talked to him about her?
Certainly I did. He knows all about the relentless colonel, the lovely Laura, and the 10,000 pounds.
You told that old beggar all my private affairs?
My dear old boy, that old beggar, as you call him, is one of the richest men in Europe. He could buy all London tomorrow without overdrawing his account. He has a house in every capital, dines off gold plates, and can prevent Russia going to war when he chooses.
What on earth do you mean?
I mean just what I say. The old man you saw today in the studio was Baron Hosberg. He's a great friend of mine, buys all my pictures and that sort of thing, and gave me a commission a month ago to paint him as a beggar. Que voulez-vous? La fantaisie d'un millionnaire? And I must say, he made a magnificent figure in his rags. Or perhaps I should say my rags. They're an old suit I got in Spain.
Baron Hausberg, good heavens! I gave him a sovereign.
Gave him a sovereign? my dear old boy, you'll never see it again. Ça ne fait le champ des autres.
I think you might have told me, Alan, and now have let me make such a fool of myself.
Well, to begin with, Huey, it never entered my mind that you went about disturbing alms in that reckless way. I can understand you're kissing a pretty model, but you're giving a sovereign to an ugly one? By Jove, no. Besides, the fact is that when you came in, I didn't know whether Hosberg would like his name mentioned. You know he was in full dress.
What a duffer he must think me.
Not at all. He was in the highest spirits after you left, kept chuckling to himself and rubbing his old wrinkled hands together. I couldn't make out why he was so interested to know all about you, but I see it all now. He'll invest your sovereign for you, Huey, pay you the interest every 6 months, and have a capital story to tell after dinner.
I'm an unlucky devil. The best thing I could do is go to bed. And, my dear Alan, you mustn't tell anyone. I shouldn't dare show my face.
Nonsense. It reflects the highest credit on your philanthropic spirit, Huey. And don't run away. Stay and talk about Laura as much as you like.
However, Huey wouldn't stop, but walked home, feeling very unhappy and leaving Alan Trevor in fits of laughter.
The next morning, as Huey was at breakfast, the butler brought him up a card on which was written, Monsieur Gustave Naden de la part de Monsieur le Baron Hausberg. I suppose he has come for an apology, Huey thought to himself, and he told the butler to show the visitor up.
An old man with gold spectacles and gray hair came into the room and spoke in a slight French accent.
Have I the honor of addressing Monsieur Erskine? I have come from Baron Hausberg. The Baron...
I beg, sir, that you will offer him my sincerest apologies.
The Baron has commissioned me to bring you this letter.
A wedding present? To Huey Erskine and Laura Merton from an old beggar?
And inside was a check for 10,000 pounds.
When Huey and Laura were married, Alan Trevor was the best man, and the Baron made a speech at the wedding breakfast.
When the couple's friends heard the story of Huey and the Baron, they all agreed that millionaire models are rare enough, but, by Jove, model millionaires are rarer still.
There are moments when one has to choose between living one's own life fully, entirely, completely, or dragging out some false, shallow, degrading existence that the world in its hypocrisy demands.
Oscar Wilde was born in Dublin on October 16, 1854, to Sir William Wilde and his wife, Lady Jane Francesca Wilde. Oscar's mother was a successful poet and journalist. She wrote patriotic Irish verse under a pseudonym. Oscar's father was a leading ear and eye surgeon, a renowned philanthropist, and a gifted writer, who wrote books on archaeology and folklore.
He was educated at Port Ora Royal School, Trinity College in Dublin, and Oxford. While at Oxford, he became involved in the aesthetic movement and became an advocate for art's sake.
After he graduated, he moved to Chelsea and London to establish a literary career. In 1881, he published his first collection of poetry, poems that received mixed reviews by critics. He worked as an art reviewer, lectured in Britain, Ireland, the United States, and Canada, and lived in Paris.
On May 29, 1884, Oscar married Constance Lloyd, daughter of a wealthy Queen's Counsel. They had 2 sons. To support his family, Oscar accepted a job as the editor of Woman's World magazine, where he worked from 1887 to 1889.
In 1888, he published The Happy Prince and Other Tales, fairy stories written for his 2 sons. His first and only novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, was published in 1891 and received quite a negative response. This had much to do with the novel's homoerotic overtones, which caused something of a sensation amongst the Victorian critics.
In 1891, Wilde began an affair with Lord Alfred Douglas, nicknamed Bosie, who became both the love of his life and his downfall. Wilde's marriage ended in 1893.
Wilde's greatest talent was for writing plays. His first successful play, Lady Windermere's Fan, opened in February 1892. He produced a string of extremely popular comedies, including A Woman of No Importance, An Ideal Husband, and The Importance of Being Earnest. These plays were all highly acclaimed and firmly established Wilde as a playwright.
In April 1895, Oscar sued Bosie's father for libel when the Marquis of Queensberry accused him of homosexuality. Oscar's case was unsuccessful, and he was himself arrested and tried for gross indecency. He was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor for the crime of sodomy. During his time in prison, he wrote De Profundis, a dramatic monologue and autobiography which was addressed to Bosie.
Upon his release in 1897, he wrote The Ballad of Reading Gaol, revealing his concerns for inhumane prison conditions. He spent the rest of his life wandering Europe, staying with friends, and living in hotels. He died penniless of cerebral meningitis on November 30th, 1900, in a cheap Paris hotel.
It is absurd to divide people into good and bad. People are either charming or tedious.
The truth is rarely pure and never simple. Modern life would be very tedious if it were either, in modern literature, a complete impossibility.
What you really are is a Bunburyist. I was quite right in saying you were a Bunburyist. You are one of the most advanced Bunburyists I know. You have invented a very useful younger brother called Ernest, in order that you may be able to come up to town as often as you like. I have invented an invaluable permanent invalid called Bunbury, in order that I may be able to go down into the country whenever I choose. Bunbury is perfectly invaluable. If it wasn't for Bunbury's extraordinary bad health, for instance, I wouldn't be able to dine with you at Willis's tonight, for I have been really engaged to Aunt Augusta for more than a week. I know, you are absurdly careless about sending out invitations. It is very foolish of you. Nothing annoys people so much as not receiving invitations. I haven't the smallest intention of dining with Aunt Augusta. To begin with, I dine there on Monday, and once a week is quite enough to dine with one's own relations. In the second place, whenever I do dine there, I am always treated as a member of the family, and sent down with either no woman at all, or 2. In the third place, I know perfectly well whom she will place me next to tonight. She will place me next to Mary Farquhar, who always flirts with her own husband across the dinner table. That is not very pleasant. Indeed, it is not even decent. And that sort of thing is enormously on the rise. The amount of women in London who flirt with their own husbands is perfectly scandalous. It looks so bad. It is simply washing one's clean linens in public.
Selfishness is not living as one wishes to live. It's asking others to live as one wishes to live. And unselfishness is letting other people's lives alone, not interfering with them.
I feel bound to tell you that you're not down on my list of eligible young men, although I have the same list as the dear Duchess of Bolton has. We work together, in fact. However, I'm quite ready to enter your name should your answers be what a really affectionate mother requires. I'm glad to hear that you smoke, Mr. Worthing. A man should always have an occupation of some kind. There are far too many idle men in London as it is. And you are 29, is it? A very good age to be married at. I've always been of the opinion that a man who desires to be married should either know everything or nothing. Which do you know, Mr. Worthing? I have no patience and do not approve of anything that tampers with ignorance. Ignorance is like an exotic and delicate young fruit. Touch it once, and the bloom is gone. Fortunately, in England, at any rate, education produces no effect whatsoever. If it did, it would prove serious dangers to the upper class and probably lead to acts of violence in Grosvenor Square. Your income is satisfactory. Between what is expected from one during one lifetime and what is exacted from one after one's death, land ceases to be either profit or pleasure. It gives one position and prevents one from keeping it up. That is all that can be said about land. I hear tell that your parents are both dead. To lose one parent, Mr. Worthing, may be regarded as a misfortune. To lose both looks like carelessness. Who was your father? He was evidently a man of some wealth. Was he born into what the papers call the purple of commerce, or did he rise from the ranks of aristocracy? I would strongly advise you, Mr. Worthing, to try and acquire some relations as soon as possible, and to make a definite effort to produce at any rate one parent from either sex before the season is quite over. You can hardly imagine that I and Lord Bracknell would dream of allowing our only daughter, a girl brought up with the utmost care, to marry into a cloakroom and form an alliance with a parcel? Good day, Mr. Worthing.
The past is of no importance. The present is of no importance. It is with the future we have to deal. For the past is what men should not have been. The present is what men ought not to be. The future is what artists are.
Personality is a very mysterious thing. A man cannot always be estimated by what he does. He may keep the law and yet be worthless. He may break the law and yet be fine. He may be bad without ever doing anything bad.
Better for me I had not seen your face. Oh, think it was for you I killed this man? Nay, Guido, listen for a while. Until you came to Padua, I lived wretched indeed, but with no murderous thought. Very submissive to a cruel lord, very obedient to unjust commands, as pure, I think, as any gentle girl, who would now turn in horror from my hands. You came. Ah, Guido, the first kindly words I ever heard since I had come from France were from your lips. Well, that is no matter. You came, and in the passion of your eyes I read love's meaning. Everything you said touched my dumb soul to music, and you seemed fair as that young St. Michael on the wall in Santa Croce, where we go and pray. And I wonder, will I ever pray again? Well, you were fair, and in your boyish face the morning light seemed to lighten, so I loved you. And yet I did not tell you of my love. 'Twas you who sought me out, knelt at my feet, as I kneel now at yours, and with sweet vows whose music seems to linger in my ears, swore that you loved me. And I trusted you. I think there are many women in the world who, had they been done unto this vile Duke mated, chained to his side, aye, many women who would have tempted you to kill the man. I did not. Yet I know that had I done so, I had not been thus humbled in the dust. But you have loved me very faithfully. I do not think you understand me, Guido. It was for your sake that I wrought this deed, whose horror now chills my young blood to ice, for your sake only. Will you not speak to me? Love me a little. In my girlish life, I have been starved for love, and kindliness has passed me by.
We teach people how to remember. We never teach them how to grow.
Words have not merely music as sweet as that of viol and lute, color as rich and vivid as any that makes lovely for us the canvas of the Venetian or the Spaniard, and plastic form no less sure and certain than that of marble or in bronze, but thought and passion and spirituality are theirs also, and theirs indeed alone.
He did not wear his scarlet coat, for blood and wine are red, and blood and wine were on his hands when they found him with the dead, the poor dead woman whom he loved and murdered in her bed.
He walked amongst the trial men in a suit of shabby gray, a cricket cap on his head, and his step seemed light and gay, but I never saw a man who looked so wistfully at the day.
I never saw a man who looked with such a wistful eye upon that little tent of blue which prisoners call the sky, and at every drifting cloud that went with sails of silver by.
I walked with other souls in pain within another ring, and was wondering if the man had done a great or little thing, when a voice behind me whispered low, "That fellow's got to swing."
Dear Christ, the very prison walls suddenly seemed to reel, and the sky above my head became like a cask of scorching steel. And though I was a soul in pain, my pain I could not feel.
I only knew what haunted thought quickened his step, and why he looked upon the garish day with such a wistful eye. The man had killed the thing he loved, and so he had to die.
Yet each man kills the thing he loves, by each let this be heard. Some do it with the bitter look, some with a flattering word. The coward does it with a kiss, the brave man with a sword.
Some kill their love when they are young, and some when they are old. Some strangle with the hands of lust, some with the hands of gold. The kindest use a knife, because the dead so soon grow cold.
Some love too little, some too long, some sell and others buy.
Some do the deed with many tears, and some without a sigh. For each man kills the thing he loves, yet each man does not die.
He does not die a death of shame on a day of dark disgrace, nor have a noose around his neck, nor a cloth upon his face, nor drop feet first through the floor into an empty place.
He does not sit with silent men who watch him night and day, who watch him when he tries to weep and when he tries to pray, who watch him lest himself should rob the prison of its prey.
He does not wake at dawn to see dread figures throng his room, the shivering chaplain robed in white, the sheriff stern with gloom, and the governor all in shiny black with the yellow face of doom.
He does not rise in piteous haste to put on convict clothes, while some coarse-mouthed doctor gloats and notes each new and nerve-twitched pose, fingering a watch whose little ticks are like horrible hammer blows.
He does not know that sickening thirst that sands one's throat before the hangman with his gardener's gloves slips through the padded door and binds one with 3 leathern thongs that the throat may thirst no more.
He does not bend his head to hear the burial office read, nor, while the terror of his soul tells him he is not dead, cross his own coffin as he moves into the hideous shed.
He does not stare upon the air through a little roof of glass. He does not pray with lips of clay for his agony to pass, nor feel upon his shuddering cheek the kiss of Caiaphas.
I know not whether laws be right, or whether laws be wrong. All that we know who lie in jail is that the wall is strong, and that each day is like a year whose days are long.
But this I know, that every law that men have made for man, since first man took his brother's life, and the sad world began, but straws the wheat and saves the chaff with the most evil fan.
This too I know, and wise it were if earth could know the same, that every prison that men build is built with bricks of shame, and bound with bars lest Christ should see how men their brothers maim.
With bars they blur the gracious moon and blind the goodly sun. They do well to hide their hell, for in it things are done that Son of God nor Son of Man ever should look upon.
The vilest deeds like poison weeds blew well in prison air, for it is only what is good in man that wastes and withers there. Pale anguish keeps the heavy gate, and the warder is despair.
For they starve the little frightened child till it weeps both night and day, and they scourge the weak and flog the fool, and jibe the old and gray. And some grow mad, and all grow bad, and none a word may say.
Each narrow cell in which we dwell is foul and dark latrine, and the fetid breath of living death chokes up each grated screen, and all but lust is turned to dust in humanity's machine.
The brackish water that we drink creeps with a loathsome slime, and the bitter bread they weigh in scales is full of chalk and lime. And sleep will not lie down, but walks wild-eyed and cries to time.
But though lean hunger and green thirst, like asp with adder fight, we have little care for prison fare, for what chills and kills outright is that every stone one lifts by day becomes one's heart by night.
With midnight always in one's heart, and twilight in one's cell, we turn the crank, or tear the rope, each in his separate hell, and the silence is more awful far than the sound of a brazen bell.
And never a human voice comes near to speak a gentle word, and the eye that watches through the door is pitiless and hard, and by all forgot we rot and rot, with soul and body marred.
And thus we rust life's iron chain, degraded and alone. And some men curse, and some men weep, and some men make no moan. But God's eternal laws are kind, and break the heart of stone.
In every human heart that breaks, in prison cell or yard, is at that broken box that gave its treasure to the Lord, and filled the unclean leper's house with a scent of costliest nard.
Ah, happy day, they whose hearts can break, and peace of pardon win. How else may man make straight his plan, and cleanse his soul from sin? How else but through a broken heart may Lord Christ enter in?
And he of the swollen purple throat, and the stark and staring eyes, waits for the holy hands that took the thief to paradise. And a broken and contrite heart the Lord will not despise.
The man in red who reads the law gave him 3 weeks of life, 3 little weeks in which to heal his soul of his soul's strife, and cleanse from every blot of blood the hand that held the knife.
And with tears of blood he cleansed the hand that held the steel. For only blood can wipe out blood, and only tears can heal. And the crimson stain that was of Cain became Christ's snow-white seal.
In Reading Gaol, by Reading Town, there is a pit of shame, and in it lies a wretched man eaten by teeth of flame. In burning, winding sheet he lies, and his grave has got no name.
In there till Christ call forth the dead, in silence let him lie. No need to waste the foolish tear, or heave the windy sigh. The man had killed the thing he loved, so he had to die.
And all men kill the thing they love. By all let this be heard. Some do it with a bitter look, some with a flattering word. The coward does it with a kiss, the brave man with the sword.